I'm John Levine. Welcome to the Berkeley Writers at Work 30th Anniversary audio series. Berkeley Writers at Work launched in 1997 as a forum for campus writers to discuss their writing process. Since then, we have interviewed dozens of faculty writers from the departments of history, psychology, public policy, ethnic studies, and mathematics, just to name a few, to talk about how, where, and when they write. In celebration of UC Berkeley's college writing program's 30th anniversary, we are looking inward, turning the microphone towards our own writers, the vastly talented CWP lecturers, many of whom are successful writers in their own right. For more information about Berkeley Writers at Work, be sure to visit our website at writing.berkeley.edu. In this episode, continuing CWP lecturer Michelle Baptiste begins the conversation by inviting multilingual lecturer and writer Tehmina Khan to read one of her poems. This leads them into a discussion about the inspiration for poetry, the craft of translation, and how both Michelle and Tehmina tap into the rich, multicultural tapestry of their Berkeley writing classes.
I'm Michelle Baptiste, a continuing lecturer in college writing programs, and I'm entering my 21st year, and I have the pleasure today of interviewing my colleague, Tehmina Khan, who I'll let introduce herself.
Okay, yeah, so my name is Tehmina Khan, or Tehmina Khan, or Tehmina Khan. You know, there are many ways to pronounce my name. So I am a brand new lecturer here in college writing. I started back in August of 2022, and it's just a real pleasure to be here. So I come here to Berkeley from City College, San Francisco, but I also come here to Berkeley from Berkeley, where I came as an undergraduate in 1985. So I'm a poet, and it took me a long time. My journey towards poetry is long and circuitous, but I have been writing poetry for 3 decades maybe.
Okay, thank you. Yes, today I'm looking forward to getting to talk to you about some of your poetry. And the first poem I read by you was in the effort towards saving City College. But I want to go back even farther and ask you, what are some of your earliest memories of writing?
Ooh, okay. This is a great question. So one of my early memories of writing was before I could even write. I was in preschool. I think I was the last kid there, and I was just kind of sitting with crayons and paper. And the preschool teacher was writing on a piece of paper, like writing a letter or something. And she was writing, and I was looking at her and watching her make these lines, I think it was in cursives, like lines and loops and things like that. And I thought it was really cool. And so I started drawing like lines and zigzags across a page. That's my earliest memory of writing.
I remember thinking like a little older than that, even that cursive was just loops.
Yeah.
And I would just do that on a page and think I was writing in cursive.
Yeah.
Because that's what it looked like to me. Yeah. Okay, I've read a couple of your poems, and I'll start with In Memory of Al-Mutanabbi Street, Baghdad.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a short one, and it's very accessible. I don't know if you'd even want to read it aloud.
Yeah, I'd love to read it aloud.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I'll read it, and then I can talk. I'll bring in some context first. So I think it was 2007, during the Iraq War, a street called Al-Mutanabbi Street, it's a street of booksellers, was bombed. A car bomb went off. And many people believe that this was an intentional targeting of literacy and literature. A lot of small-time booksellers had stalls there. The name Al-Mutanabbi comes from a 10th century Arabic poet who is, it's hard to make such comparisons, but some people will refer to him as the Shakespeare of the Arab world. So this is a poem. The title is In Memory of Al-Mutanabbi Street, Baghdad. A car bomb explodes, setting poetry ablaze. Words warp in the flames before crumbling to ash. In the land of Gilgamesh, who learned to love, finally, we need to lose everything, like Job, to love completely. And we grieve for the grief sung in these lost pages, whose secret whispers we will never hear. When a street of poems is murdered, a constellation goes dark. In the deepening darkness, we wait for a poem to light the way. How dark our skies, how lonely the imagination. How deep the longing. In the ash of these pages, what phoenix will sing?
Loved hearing you read it aloud.
Thank you.
Yes. It was so different than reading it a couple times alone
Yeah.
in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you going through many different images, from the fire to the light, the grief, the murder, and then also the hope. Yeah, how did you come up with those images? Like you have the literal image of the street burning, and then you have the more metaphoric or symbolic language.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's coming out of like so many like threads that are part of, I guess, my literary imagination, and as well as my own like personal grief over the Iraq War in general. In the beginnings of the Iraq War, I worked with an Iraqi community association here in the Bay Area.
Is that 1990, 91, you mean 91?
This is 2003.
Which war and which year?
Which war and which year? Okay. Although if we go back to 1991, if we go back to the first Gulf War, I was heavily invested in protesting and opposing that war here in Berkeley, as a matter of fact. But then coming to, like, for example, Gilgamesh is really like a part of my own literary canon, I guess. I mean, I think I read Gilgamesh as a graduate student and I teach it sometimes. I taught it at City College, an abridged version. But I'm always struck, I'm always moved by the story of love and loss in this ancient text. So bringing Gilgamesh into the story, as well as the story of Job, or Ayub in Arabic, who had to lose absolutely everything to come to himself, right? To come to a sacred calling. So as we might talk about later, I worked on a translation of a poem by al-Mutanabi himself. And some of these lines, that next couplet, we grieve for the grief sung in these lost pages, comes from some lines I was working on in that translation.
Wow. Okay, let's shift to that topic for the moment. I'm going to ask you more about your writing process later.
Sure. Yeah.
But okay, so moving into like just thinking about translation and multilingualism. First of all, what languages do you speak and what languages do you write in?
Yeah.
And then if you want to add a little more onto that, you could expand into what the impact of being multilingual is on your identity as a reader and writer, and just how it impacts you, as a human being, of course.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a rich and complicated question. My dominant language is English. I grew up speaking English. My parents are immigrants from India, and they, at a certain point in their immigration journey, they chose to speak to their children in only English for many complicated reasons. So English is my dominant language. Indian English specifically is what I consider my home language, although I don't communicate in Indian English anymore, really. I shift in and out of it depending on who I'm talking to. And I speak Urdu not very well and not very fluently, and I worked really hard for my Urdu. I worked hard. I took Hindi classes here at Berkeley. Hindi and Urdu are effectively the same language. I took Urdu classes, informal Urdu classes, with a scholar of Urdu literature, Ms. Hamida Chopra, who's a Berkeley person. That was harder than any graduate class I ever took. But I have some command of Urdu, some command of literary Urdu, and I once in a while I'll ask my parents to, explain something to me, and so I have some command of Urdu, and it's a heritage language. I studied Arabic also here at Berkeley and in Cairo at the American University in Cairo while I was a Berkeley student. And Arabic, as a Muslim, Arabic is another heritage language. And I studied Spanish in high school when I was, and so like learning Spanish kind of like clicked a switch in me for just like opening up like language and words and sensibility, and like being able to express like another self in another language is just really key, I think, to my literary identity, but also as my identity as a language speaker, as like a user of language. And I feel like my literary passion begins in Spanish and not in English. So I have a discomfort with the English language, even if it is my dominant language. It doesn't feel right, even though I'm stuck with it. So like one of the poems, a student of mine at City College quoted from this poem, and it took me back. It was like Antonio Machado's poem, Caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. Traveler, there's no road. The road's made by walking. I think that's a poem that just like brought me into the world of poetry in a way that like poetry in English just didn't do.
Oh, okay. So I know you're now like even more multilingual than I expected. I didn't know you had so many languages that you've acquired over time, and that even you're like, quite I guess, proficient in, I'll say, as a reader and writer in your practices. And I know you're engaged, and you mentioned this recently in the translation of this centuries old, poem by Al-Mutanabi, Ode to Harun. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then what drew you to translating it? And just walk us through the nitty gritty process of like how you go back and forth. And you have some, like, I guess, revealing or transparency of your process there
Okay. Yeah.
in some ways on, I think, in some of the files you shared with me. Yeah, what's your process and what drew you to doing this work with this poem?
With this poem, okay. I have one more language. I studied
gosh,
two years of I forget. Yeah, no, it's okay. I studied 2 years of Chinese at City College when I was like in my 30s and bored, and actually working in the Chinese community. Actually, I was working as a citizenship tutor also at City College of San Francisco, and I thought, well, let me just like take some Chinese because
I think we're at least, I don't know if I lost track, 5 languages or more.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, 5 is about right. Like I would say 4.5 because
Okay.
like Chinese is like way dormant at this point. But going back to the process of translating this poem, I'd like to walk back to like how I started translating in the first place and what translation means to me. Because I don't, I'm not working towards product necessarily when I'm engaged in translation. It's more about the process. I took a translation workshop in the year 2000 with the poet Martha Collins, who is like a dear friend and mentor to me. And in this workshop, which was in Boston at a workshop called the William Joyner Center on War and Its Social Consequences, which is a workshop developed to bring Vietnamese poets and Vietnam veteran poets together. In Martha's workshop, we sat with 2 Vietnamese poets and translated their poems. And it was just mind-blowing, with a glossary and with an interpreter talking through, well, when you're talking about this pine tree, can you tell us what it means? And things like that. And, when you mean, like, when you're talking about this rainstorm, can you tell us what you're getting at? And so, like, talking through that process, I never thought I had, like, the language capabilities to do literary translation. But talking through that process, it sort of broke open something in me. And since then, I had been going to translating conferences and just kind of like dabbling here and there in translation. And then I worked here in the Bay Area. I taught literary translation to kids under the mentorship of John Oliver Simon, who was a master translator of Spanish language texts, passed away some 6 years ago now. Berkeley man, so and beautiful poet as well. So I taught in elementary schools. I taught in my son's elementary school, which was really just, I think, one of the most profound experiences I had with poetry. Is just like, for example, we would read like 6 lines of Dante, lines that describe Cerberus and monsters, and the kids would have a glossary. And this was like a Spanish immersion classroom, so they would have like some cognates, they would have some understanding of Spanish that would carry over to like kind of figuring out what these words are in English. And so they would translate these lines about Cerberus, and Cerberus who has 3 heads and barks really loudly and is slobbering, and it's like, it's gross and disgusting and violent. And the 4th graders just loved it. So then after translating the poem, I was like, okay, now you make your own monster. And they were like, yeah. So that's part of my translation journey. This poem, I started translating after the bombing in Baghdad, looking at a text, which at a translation, a scholarly translation by A.J. Arbery, who's like a master scholarly translator, but it doesn't necessarily read so well as a poem. And so I worked with this translation, with Arbery's translation, and it has the Arabic text side by side, and my handy dandy dictionary, just kind of plodding through lines and images and, trying to figure out, where is this poem going? What is it saying? What does it say to me? Right. And so it's more about, what I want to get from this poem than where this translation leads me. And I put it away for a long time. I had grand plans to turn it into a master's thesis, and that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. So then I ended up just like putting it aside, and I came back to it last year because I decided to apply for the Napa Writers Conference in translation. No, 2 years ago, with Bob Haas, also a Berkeley poet. Then I did that workshop and then came back to this translation and then like added in and worked on some of what I have. So I have like 11 lines of this 46-line poem.
Wow. But I have it here, just
Yeah.
the part you shared with me.
Yeah.
And I guess it's 11 lines.
Yeah.
And then I saw on the back pages where you were looking at lots of synonyms.
Yeah.
And just really, I'm assuming, mulling over what would be the best rhythm, the best connotation. And then you even just added how it spoke to you. and bringing that to life, like, 1,000 years.
Right, 1,000 years later, yeah.
That's incredible.
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
Okay. So this is Ode to Harun, father of Ali, son of Abdulaziz, clerk in a revenue office, and follower of Sufism. And these are lines 1 to 11. The watchman feels safe when you visit, for you bring light to the gloom. When she reveals her beauty, she is musk. When she travels at night, she is the sun. I grieve for the grief that you hid from me when you stole my senses. And I lament that I no longer suffer sickness as I did when my body was whole. You've turned your wide eyes into gaping wounds in my gut. They pierce me like a dark spear that might break in my flesh. When pushed, I am the boulder in the ravine, and when I speak, I am the Gemini. If fools are unaware of me, I forgive them their blindness. The night's temperament makes my camel wonder, which is more vast, the desert or my breast? She travels through the night without stopping, wearing away the fat in her hump. Her harness distended, her feet committed, yet the road ahead is virgin.
Thank you. I'm intrigued, and one thing that stood out to me, and I looked back at all the pages, of your work that you shared, is just the word Gemini. I was so surprised that that was just right there. I was just so curious about that.
Yeah, I'm curious about it too. I mean, it's in the poem, and that's what it is. And I didn't know what else to do with it except keep it as it was. And I'm also intrigued by the connotation of those lines.
There's so many layers there. I mean, I had to reread it myself a couple times, and then just listening to it with you. I mean, I feel like it's just beautiful that you went back to this. So I said recently, and then I realized, you recently returned to it because you had started this project so long ago.
I did, yeah.
And it's still speaking to you and calling you, and moving toward finishing up. I'd want to ask you anything else you'd like to share about translation and how that influences you as a teacher in college writing programs today.
So I am mostly teaching college writing R1A, and many of my students, I think all of my students, are coming from multilingual backgrounds, and they bring that richness into the classroom. And I write my students an introductory letter, and I ask them to write me an introductory letter. And one of the things I ask about are, what languages do you speak? And I tell them what languages I speak as well. And I encourage them to bring their language sensibilities into the discourse, into the classroom. I had a student this semester who wrote about, so my class is focused on bell hooks all about love, and they write about love and lovelessness. And one of the students was breaking down like some, common ideas about romantic love. And she said, that we have this saying that you're looking for your media naranja, your half orange. When you're looking for a romantic partner, that's what you're looking for, someone to complete you. And then she then breaks it down with what bell hooks is saying about finding our love within ourselves. So things like that, where students are bringing in heritage language sensibilities into the classroom and into their discourse. I think I had a student bring in some Hindi language discourse as well. And, and also discussing, breaking down some Bollywood archetypes in one of his papers, for example. And so I think by just acknowledging that we speak other languages, just acknowledging that we have other rhythms, other sensibilities that express ourselves in ways that we don't get in the English language, just bringing that up is important. And also just reminding students that when appropriate, you can bring these languages into academic discourse, right? It can enhance your writing voice.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. One line that really stood out to me in your translation project from the poem you were just speaking about a few moments ago is, and I lament that I no longer suffer sickness as I did when my body was whole. It's such an interesting, I guess, juxtaposition.
Right. I think that the speaker finds life. The speaker finds like a wholeness in suffering, right? In suffering for love in particular, in that pining, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, even all the way to the more colloquial sense, it just, I was just so curious about it.
Yeah. And I'm still very curious about this poem.
Yeah. I mean, even when people say, they're lamenting that they're getting older, another birthday, I always like that saying where it's like, well, it's better than the alternative.
Right. Right.
So that kind of reminds me of that too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like just, embracing life even with all of its struggles and
Yeah.
strife and it's what we have.
Right.
So
Right.
thank you, Tehmina, for
Thank you,
sharing
Michelle. Thank
yourself
you
as an
so much.
author and
Yeah.
translator with me and everybody who's listening.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to Berkeley Writers at Work audio series, a production of the college writing programs at UC Berkeley. You can find more information about our program at writing.berkeley.edu. I'm John Levine.